So Bob, I have pushed the live stream and I have made you host. Now you can make
Okay.
me co-host.
All right. There we go.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Hi, Greg. Hi, Susan. Good to see you all.
Hello.
Hi, Doreen and Linda.
Hi there.
Hi, Linda. I said Linda. Hi, Linda. Hi, Joan. Oh, there's two Lindas. Okay, I thought I said Linda twice. There you go. I did see two Lindas. And we have a Melinda and a Nancy. Hi, Nancy. Also, all familiar faces so far, I think. The one that's Linda's iPhone. I know Linda Franks. And then we have Barbara and Joan and Becky and Margaret and Jan. Hi, Elizabeth.
Hello, how are you?
I'm very good. How are you?
I'm doing very well today.
I am glad my house is anchored to the ground. We're having very high winds here. We were warned about it, so they aren't a surprise. 50-mile-an-hour gusts. The Shenandoah Valley gets that. Don't ask me why.
You had the storms we had 2 days ago.
Is that right? Where are you, Greg?
Oklahoma.
Okay. What I think, what's strange, what I haven't figured out is which direction the wind is blowing from, because 1 minute it's blowing from the north, the next minute it's blowing from the south. So I can't quite tell what's going on outside, which is also why I didn't go out and get on a bicycle today. Hi, Louise. Hi, Pam. Verna, Doreen. It looks like it's always just turned evening at Melinda's house. She's got her mood lights on and looks very cozy.
Thank you.
And we have Brandon today as our TA, so he'll scoop up any questions you put in the chat. That'd be nice. He'll also put in some names of some travel classes. Got new travel classes coming in May. A lot of new travel classes. I mentioned one this morning about, well, actually, learners mentioned the one about how to pack for a 2-week trip in a carry-on. And apparently that's going to be a popular class. So that'll be next Thursday, 11 o'clock Eastern Daylight Time. If you can't make it, we'll do it. They'll be running that class again. Don't worry. Hi, Laura. Good to see you.
Good to be here. See, it looks like a full class.
It's getting there. It's getting there.
Good.
We're going to be doing communism in Europe. This is a very interesting one. We did parts of this 4 weeks ago. So we're going to rerun. Some of it'll be a little bit of repetition from 4 weeks ago. But most of it's going to be brand new stuff. Hi, Carolyn. And
Hi, Russ.
lots of new stuff. And we've got Bev and company there. Good to see you all this Friday afternoon. Yep, we got a full house. Looks like there's 25 on my screen. And I think we'll have a few more join us. We'll give about 1 more minute before we get a start. Melinda says she's not been getting the notes. Yep. But you're not getting emails either, correct, Melinda?
Yeah, I've been having, I was even on the phone with him yesterday, and it has something to do with my Comcast. I do get the newsletters, but I don't get any of the follow-up notes. And I haven't for like 2 weeks. So I realized I haven't been, so if you're in a position to just send them to me directly, I think that, and I just went to Comcast and I put Get Set Up in my address book like 3 weeks ago, and that didn't help. And I just signed on to Comcast and put y'all in. So maybe that this afternoon, so maybe that'll help. But and back in the beginning, in January through about 3 weeks ago, I was getting everything, no problem, showing up in junk mail, but I could find it in junk. Now it's not even in junk. So
have you checked your spam folder?
That's what I'm saying. That's where it used to consistently go. And I just got in the habit of just going, well, okay, let's see what Get Smart got in my spam folder today. But now it's not even going there. So
Have you gone to Get Smart to find out what address they're using? Because it's my understanding sometimes when you're put in spam and you delete it, that the person sending it finds out. I've had that happen to me, and then they sort of like canceled it, stopped sending it. I went back and went through the process again, and they said, we can't send it to this email.
No, that's not the problem, because I don't delete my spam until after, it's been read. And I always even make a point of sending it to my inbox to try to train the spam box that this is a good thing, start redirecting it. And like I said, we've been emailing, and I actually got on the phone yesterday, and they said part of it has to do with Comcast.
Yeah. Well, good. Well, that's a good reminder, though, that you can call Get Set Up, the help desk, and they can help. They'll do everything they can to help you, because I know they really want to. And I know that Brandon will take note of that, our team.
I mean, I might have to the only fix they can figure now is to open a whole new account with a Gmail account and try it that way. But the problem is I'm signed up with your classes and everything through the Comcast. So, even if I signed up new, I wouldn't be recognized as the person that signed up for this class.
Hopefully we'll get that sorted out.
I know it. 'Cause
well, I'll also, if there's time at the end of the class today, I'll show everybody how you can go on and search under a guide. I know it's just some of you have seen me do this, but I'll just show you again because there's a lot of new travel classes coming up. And I want to make sure you all can find the classes. Good to have everybody with us this afternoon. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen for a minute here. And should see something that says History Fridays.
Yes, we do.
The story of communism in Europe. And if anybody's been to the Alexanderplatz in Berlin, this is what you see. This is the world clock.
Yes.
And it was created under the Jutta, you probably know this.
Yep.
This was actually in East Berlin. So this was kind of interesting. I had a chance to visit Berlin, East and West, in 2014. So we had an exchange student who lived in Hohenneuendorf, which is a little bit north of Berlin, was in the former East Berlin. And his parents were gracious hosts and great tour guides for us as we went through that part of Germany. I'm your guide, Russ Eanes. I'm from Harrisonburg, Virginia. I'm a writer, a walker, and a cyclist, and I formerly was a book publisher. And in that role, my favorite thing was to help an author shape their ideas into a book. Now I'm a full-time guide, among other things, working for Get Set Up because I love working with older learners. I get a lot of energy from working with older learners, and I also like to collect a lot of wisdom from you all. Get Set Up helps you learn useful skills from people like you so you can do wonderful things. Just was talking to somebody a little while ago. If you need help with any kind of technology, your smartphone, to trying to figure out what kind of wine might work best with supper tonight, Get Set Up can help you with that. You can request a recording of this class after the class. You just email help@getsetup.io and they'll help you out. If you're joining by live stream, and we are live streaming today, the best way to participate is to join us and register for a class. That way you can be live and ask questions. Lastly, Get Setup's not paid to promote any specific products. We are strictly an educational organization. I'm going to talk to you later here. Thanks. We're not at the end about related classes. You can see some of those. There's a lot coming up next week. So we'll hopefully get some time to do that. I'm going to stop share for 1 second, my screen, because I'm going to reshare it so we can watch some Rick Steves video. Glad to have everyone with us. We got a big class 30, folks. Anybody here new to Get Set Up today? Raise your hand or raise your virtual hand if you're a new person to Get Set Up, because I always have got new people in classes and I love it. Many familiar faces, but also lots of new faces for this series of classes. I'm so glad you joined us today. We've been having a lot of fun with Rick Steves all month. He was with us April 13th for an interview, and you can find that interview on the Get Set Up YouTube channel if you go there. Well, we're going to be talking about communism in Europe today. This is a great set of videos, so I'm going to start them up here. And we'll watch them all together and then come back and discuss it and have some talk about any of us who've had experiences with communism in Europe, either before or after the Berlin Wall came down.
After World War II, Germany was divided by the Iron Curtain into the Free West and Communist East. With the fall of communism in 1989, Germany was reunited. In the historic region of Saxony, we toured Dresden and Leipzig. We start in Dresden with fanciful Baroque architecture and some of the best museum going in all of Germany. It's a city that mixes a dynamic history with a delightful to stroll cityscape. At the peak of its power in the 18th century, this wealthy capital of Saxony ruled much of eastern Germany from the banks of the Elbe River. Saxony's greatest ruler was Augustus the Strong. To embellish his capital, he imported artists from all over Europe, especially from Italy. Dresden's grand architecture and dedication to the arts earned it the nickname Florence on the Elbe. In spite of its resurgence, Dresden is still known for its destruction in World War II. American and British planes firebombed the city on the night of February 13, 1945. The bombing was so fierce, it created its own climate, a firestorm. More than 25,000 people were killed in just one night, and 75% of the historic center was destroyed. Memorials, while understated, remember the horror of war. This simple inscription recalls that after the air raids, the bodies of 6,865 people killed in the bombing were burnt on this spot. For 40 years, through the Cold War, Dresden was part of communist East Germany. It was in what was called the Valley of the Clueless, one of the only places in East Germany that didn't get Western television. Under the communists, Dresden restored some of its damaged buildings, left others in ruins, and replaced many with modern utilitarian sprawl. Prager Street, a bombed-out ruins until the 1960s, was rebuilt as a showcase for communist ideals. Its vast, uniform apartment blocks goose-step up the boulevard to this day. The design is typical of Soviet bloc architecture, from Moscow to Bucharest. Today, after a thorough update, they've become desirable places to live. After German reunification, the rebuilding of Dresden accelerated. The transformation has been impressive, and the city's once devastated historic center has been reconstructed. The Frauenkirche, or Church of Our Lady, is the symbol and soul of the city. When completed in 1743, this was Germany's tallest Protestant church. Then, in February of 1945, after the city was bombed, in the last months of the war, the Frauenkirche collapsed. For a generation, it lay there, a pile of rubble. Then Dresdeners decided to rebuild it completely and painstakingly. With the help of international donations, Dresden's most beloved church was rebuilt and finally reopened to the public in 2005.
Wow.
Stepping inside, you're struck by the shape. Not so wide, but very tall. The color scheme is pastel to emphasize the joy of faith and enhance the uplifting atmosphere of the services held here. The curves help create a feeling of community. A Lutheran church, but built at the peak of the Baroque period, it seems the artistic style of the age trumped the Lutheran taste for simplicity. The church's twisted old cross, which fell 300 feet from the tip of the dome and burned in the rubble, caps an inspirational story. Climbing to the top of the beautifully reconstructed dome, you're rewarded with a commanding view over Dresden and its river. The rebirth of the city is evident everywhere. This central square was once ringed by the homes of rich merchants. It's once again the heart of the city, alive with people and cafes. Dresden's delightful terrace was originally a defensive rampart. Today it's a welcoming promenade overlooking the Elbe. Its nickname, the Balcony of Europe. And a fleet of 19th century paddle boats tempts visitors for a lazy river cruise. Leipzig remembers its tough 20th century with a little whimsy. This statue represents how East Germany endured 2 harsh dictatorships in succession. The flat-palmed Sieg Heil of the Nazis and the proletariat's raised fist from the communist era. This poor fellow, repressed by both regimes with his head scrunched down, seems to represent individuality under siege. Somehow, he'll get through it all. To learn more, step into Leipzig's Contemporary History Museum, which tells the 44-year story of communism in East Germany. After the devastation of World War II, the line between East and West was drawn, and Leipzig ended up in Stalin's camp. In those desperate post-war years, the stability and security provided by East Germany's communist government was appreciated. Out of the squalor came a forced uniformity, and if you played by the rules, life was not miserable. Housing was a major priority, as so many were homeless after the war. Locals recall how there wasn't a lot, but people had what they needed. Generally, what they had was what their neighbors had. Children all had the same blocks, books, and cuddly stuffed pets. Western pop music, while reined in and certainly controlled, was allowed, from the Beatles to Jethro Tull. But of course, people eventually insist on freedom. To learn more, I'm joined by Leipzig tour guide Gisa Schoenfeld. The hated secret police force in communist East Germany was the Stasi. Its old headquarters now houses a museum dedicated to telling the Stasi's dirty deeds. It offers a fascinating look at what it took to control the people.
This is the symbol for the Ministry for State Security, Staatssicherheit, Stasi.
Stasi, State Security. Modeled after the Soviet Union's secret police, the notorious KGB, the Stasi recruited over 500,000 informants from every walk of life. It collected mountains of data on its citizens. The former offices contained tools of the trade, a small camera that could be concealed in a briefcase, easy-to-hide microphones, including one hidden in a button, disguises, and forged documents.
The Stasi officers set people on chairs with a piece of cloth, and the piece of cloth would absorb the smell when the suspect sweated during the interrogation. And then they placed the cloth into these jars, preserving the smell. And whenever something suspicious turned up, for example, a leaflet, they brought in the dogs smelled the item, then smelled the jars.
So the dogs would match the smell,
Exactly.
and that would be enough to send them to jail?
That would be enough.
All mail and packages coming into the country was searched. These machines enabled agents to steam letters open, read them, and then reseal them. The Stasi stole millions in West German hard currency, sent to struggling East Germans by West German relatives. And they confiscated piles of cassette tapes which contained forbidden Western pop music. These cassettes were then reused to record interrogation sessions. After freedom, people were free to look at their personal files?
Yes, but it was an agonizing decision to make. The Stasi had hundreds and thousands of informants, so there were colleagues, friends, family members spying on people. And then it was very difficult to choose. Do I want to know what information the Stasi kept on me? Or would I would also find out who spied on me.
So you could look at your file, but you might find your uncle was informing on you, and maybe you just better not go there.
Exactly.
Leipzig's beloved St. Nicholas Church played a pivotal role in the people's successful fight for freedom. In the 1980s, this venerable church hosted weekly prayer meetings for peace. These turned political, making St. Nicholas a staging ground for the peaceful revolution that would ultimately topple the communist regime. A column in the church square celebrates the church's contribution to German freedom. So eventually, these Monday prayer services for peace spilled out of the church and into the city at large.
Yes, they got bigger and bigger every week. The largest demonstration here in Leipzig was 450,000 protesters, but they all remained peaceful. And that's the biggest accomplishment. That's why there was no reason to shoot them.
So what eventually happened?
Eventually, the wall came down in Berlin, and the borders were opened, and people had gained their freedom.
The peaceful revolution.
Very much so.
But to really feel the vibrancy of the new Berlin, I enjoy exploring residential neighborhoods deeper into the former Eastern Zone. Young, in-the-know locals agree that Prenzlauer Berg is one of Berlin's most colorful neighborhoods. It's a classic case of an old workers' quarter becoming trendy. Prenzlauer Berg was bordered by the Berlin Wall. Today, what was once a former death strip along the wall is a fun-loving park. The remains of the hated wall are now a showcase for counterculture graffiti artists, a canvas for free-spirited spray painters. The Mauer Park, or Wall Park, hosts a parade of alternative lifestyles. It's a youthful culture of people with no living memory of communism. There's plenty of picnicking and lots of entertainment. And each summer Sunday, the park hosts a giant karaoke free-for-all. To better understand this dynamic city, I'm joined by my fellow tour guide and local journalist, Holger Zimmer.
Well, this is Prenzlauer Berg. This is my neighborhood, really, you know? And I've been living here since the end of communism, and I've seen a lot of changes here. It's a fine example of how Berlin developed. Back in the 1850s, 70s, Industrial Revolution comes along. The population of Berlin doubled within the space of 30 years, from 1 to 2 million. So people need apartments, people need a space to live. So that's why all these
huge
buildings
building project. Look at this. Lots
Yes.
of workers' accommodation.
And we were lucky that we can still see them because they haven't been destroyed in the Second World War much. So that's pretty much survived here. And then after 45, this is East Berlin here. This is communism. So people don't pay rent, so the buildings actually collapse.
So it got
fall
really
apart.
run down during
Run
communism.
down. But that means when 89 comes along, the wall falls, people move in, young people, students, creative people move in here, and they basically take these old buildings that no one else wanted to live there anymore, with coal heating, with like a toilet that's just kind of like half a floor down, and they come and live there, you know, and they doll it up and they change the place completely.
Must have been a very creative time.
Absolutely, lots of vibe, lots of people out on the rooftops playing guitar, playing music, just meeting on the street. And I mean, the artists, let's face it, they've gone. But
So
other
that's
people here,
gentrification. It's cool. People come in with money.
Yes.
The creative people move out, and now you've got comfortable, desirable apartments.
yeah, and like me, like I came here as a student, now I have kids, and I enjoy living here.
So you don't have to go downstairs for the
Absolutely,
toilet.
yes. And I don't need to bring up my bucket of coal anymore.
Nice. I love these happy little crossing signals. They're so jaunty.
Yeah, that's one thing people here really kept from the communist times, and they really fought for them.
So popular demand.
Yeah, and we call them Ampelmännchen,
Ampelmännchen.
little light man.
Okay, Ampelmännchen.
So here's a place where the old spirit still survives.
Let's take a peek in.
They're now.
So this was originally squatters.
This was a squatter place, yes.
And today-
The next door.
they're paying rent?
Today they're paying rent. And they still like care for their house and they still do something. And of course, like they don't have much money, but they still keep it up. The former squatters now have a place to stay.
The Spree River, which cuts through the heart of the city, has taken on new life. A relaxing hour-long boat tour, which comes with an interesting narration, is both time and money well spent. It's a poignant cruise because this river was once a symbol of division. But today, Berlin is thoughtfully incorporating the river into a people-friendly cityscape. Cruising along a delightful riverside path, you'll pass the impressive new buildings housing the German government. Fine bridges symbolizing the new connection of East and West, and inviting beach cafes. Berlin. Visitors here are understandably fascinated by the Nazi sites, communism, and the wall. But for today's young Berliners, that's history. In their city, former military parade grounds are where you go for a tan. And the wall is simply a backdrop for a party. For any Berliner under 30, their world has always been capitalistic, democratic, free, and peaceful.
Sadly, bad times under the Germans were replaced with bad times under the Russians. While Soviet rule was harsh, Hungary managed to fashion its milder, yet still acceptable to Moscow, goulash communism, which allowed for a little private enterprise, easier travel, and less censorship. Because of this, Hungary was the envy of its more strictly controlled neighbors.
This pedestrian boulevard, Váci utca, is the main shopping and tourism artery. Before the fall of communism, wannabe shoppers from all over Eastern Europe came to this street. They'd drool over Nikes, Reeboks, and the fine capitalist cuisine before any of these Western evils were available elsewhere in the Warsaw Pact region. In the 1980s, a stroll down this street was the closest East Germans, Czechs, and Poles could get to a day pass to the West.
Budapest was always a bit more rebellious, a bit more independent in some sense, and our neighbors just loved this place. Czechs and Poles would come here for an American cigarette or just pop in and out of shops, simply to taste the West. This was Western life.
When some Hungarians are nostalgic for what they consider the good old days of communism, they drop by the Yeg Buffet. Little seems to have changed here at the Yeg Buffet. First, you choose what you want at the counter. Then you try to explain that to the cashier and pay. Trade your receipt back at the counter for your goodies. And finally, enjoy it all standing up, communist style. The dark underside of Hungary's 20th century story is on display at the House of Terror, housed in the former headquarters of both the Nazis and later the Communists' secret police. It welcomes you with a Soviet tank and a towering wall covered with portraits of the victims of this building. This museum makes it clear that while the uniforms changed in 1945, the terror did not. It offers a disturbing look at the grim terror of both the far right and the far left inflicted on the people of Budapest. To keep dissent to a minimum, the secret police of both the Nazis and the Communists imprisoned, deported, or executed anyone suspected of being an enemy of the state. Rooms feature the many bleak dimensions of life in Hungary before freedom. Gulag life. Countless writers, artists, and dissidents spent their best years breaking rocks in quarries. Propaganda preached. Wave the flag, trust your leaders, and you'll enjoy the material fruits of your obedience. Both Nazism and communism celebrated a sham justice and a sham democracy. Behind the banners were all the domestic spy tools governments used to keep a people in line. Joining the church was a way to express dissent, and a people's faith was one thing the totalitarian governments could not control. The basement was the grim scene of torture and executions. While there is a happy ending, video clips show the festive and exhilarating days in 1991 when the last Soviets departed. The wall of the victimizers is an evocative send-off. It reminds visitors that most local members and supporters of the secret police, many of whom are still living, were never brought to justice. Statue Park welcomes the curious at the edge of town. When regimes fall, so do their monuments. Budapest saved its souvenirs of totalitarianism and shows them off here. Just think of all these statues of Lenin and company crashing to the ground to the cheers of the masses. At Statue Park, you'll see the communist all-stars, Marx, local wannabe Stalins, and Lenin in his favorite hailing a cab pose. In a kind of demagogue's hell, they're left with no one to preach to but each other and stony socialist symbols. The heroic soldier, the obedient worker, the tireless mother.
Under Soviet communism, censorship was taken to extremes. Art was only acceptable if it promoted the ideology. The only sanctioned art form in the Eastern Bloc was social realism.
This is social realism. Leaders were portrayed with unquestioned authority. Individuals were idealized as cogs in the machine, strong, stoic, doing their job well and proudly for the good of the nation. Distinguishing features were unimportant. People all looked the same, unquestioning patriots, trusting and serving their nation. These days, with half the local citizenry having no living memory of communism, there's just not much respect. The gift shop offers a tempting parade of communist kitsch. Consider picking up a Red Star lapel pin, a worker's pocket watch, or even a Communist Party vodka flask.
This is a fun souvenir, the greatest hits of communism.
Nobody can argue that the replacement of communism by capitalism hasn't pumped up the energy in this great city. Cafes are thriving. People are enjoying life. And the city's breezy riverfront promenade is lined with diversions. A romantic way to cap your day and our visit is an evening cruise on the Blue Danube. As the sun goes down, an ensemble of icons grabs your attention. Mighty bridges linking Buda and Pest. The stubborn citadel still standing tall, and monuments honoring a hard-earned freedom. Strolling the 3 miles around the lake, visitors enjoy ever-changing views. Also enjoying dramatic lake views are handsome villas, mostly from the 19th century. My favorite was once the vacation villa of Yugoslav president for life, Marshal Tito.
Slovenia was one of 6 republics that united to make Yugoslavia, a country that existed basically from just after World War I until the 1990s. Tito, a larger-than-life, strong-armed dictator, was the one leader able to hold that troubled union together.
When Tito ran Yugoslavia, he huddled with foreign dignitaries from Indira Gandhi and Nikita Khrushchev to Kim Il-sung right here. After Tito died in 1980, his villa was converted into a classy hotel, offering guests a James Bond ambience. In this high-end suite, you can actually sleep in the dictator's bed. And visitors can use Tito's personal desk for something I bet he never imagined: sending an email. Here in what was Tito's ballroom, a mural survives, telling of World War II heroics. After the Nazis bombed Belgrade and took over their country, the ragtag gang of Yugoslav patriots, inspired by charismatic commanders, formed a resistance army. Vastly outgunned, they fought back valiantly, eventually defeating the German invaders.
Tito and his partisan army booted the Nazis without Soviet support. That's why, unlike his Eastern European neighbors, Tito could and did chart his own course, independent from the USSR.
My friend and Slovenian tour guide Tina Hiti is joining us to help sort out the Yugoslav puzzle. I find this propaganda so stirring. I can see how it would make people just want to wave a flag.
Yeah, this is a very typical socialist realism propaganda. It was all over Eastern Europe. And if you look at the picture, you can see the proud workers, you know, carrying their tools. You can see them with shovels. Yeah, and then you can see here the true representative of a strong woman carrying a child and proudly waving the flag. But still, you know, it's a propaganda of Eastern Europe. But it was so different over here. We were never inside the Warsaw Pact. That's why maybe the faces are a little happier.
So how was communism in Yugoslavia different from all the communism we think about with the USSR?
Well, we chose our way, the third way we called it. And it was a lot different. Like, we could travel, we had free market economy, and there were jobs for everybody. Social system was good.
Tito had some magic ability to bring it together.
Well, probably his magic ability was that he was a mix of all the nationalities that included Yugoslavia. His mom was a Slovene, his dad was a Croat, and his wife was a Serb. So he was the only true Yugoslav there was.
Today, are you happier with or without Tito and Yugoslavia?
I will say I was happy that I could live a part of Yugoslavia, but I'm happy to be living in European Union as well now.
Wenceslas Square is the main square of the country and the natural assembly point when the Czech people need to raise their collective voice for change. In the 19th century, the age of divine kings and ruling families was coming to an end. Here, as in much of Europe, nationalism was on the rise. By the end of World War I, the Habsburgs were history, and the birth of an independent Czechoslovakia was celebrated on this square. But independence lasted barely 20 years. In 1939, the Nazis marched in. While Prague escaped the bombs of World War II, it couldn't avoid the communists who came next and stayed for 40 years. But with this square as the stage, people power ultimately prevailed.
In the 20th century, my family lived history on this square. In 1918, my grandma watched the Habsburg Eagles being pulled down from the buildings. In 1939, my aunt saw the Nazis pulling in. In 1968, my dad stood here with his bare hands against the Soviet tanks. And in 1989, was my generation's turn.
So you were here. Tell me what happened.
In November '89, a student march headed for this square kicked off 2 weeks of demonstrations. For 14 nights, this square filled with 300,000 people.
Each night, 300,000 people here.
And on the last night, Václav Havel, the playwright, who would become our next president, announced from that balcony the resignation of the communist government.
Wow.
Suddenly, we were free.
And without a shot, the communist era had ended for the Czech people.
Well, it's quite a story. Everywhere from Germany to Yugoslavia, Czechoslovakia, and everywhere in between, Hungary. Anyone here visited the former Eastern countries since communism fell? Go ahead and raise your hand, or maybe also, maybe since we got so many, a virtual hand. That'll pop you into a queue, and I can just call on you in the queue. That'll make it easier. If you know how to do a virtual hand raise. Great. We got Nancy and Melinda up there. Go ahead, Melinda.
I just wanted to say I was lucky enough to get to see both sides. My husband and I went over there in 1989 while it was still under communist control. My husband was a Rakuzi, so he had Hungarian background and was interested. I'm a Scot. So anyway, we went over and needed to get visas and all that, and had planned on spending 5 days there. And it was really very creepy. I mean, I was even surprised because I've been in third world countries and things like that. But we came out of Vienna and rolled into the train station. And as my husband said, you felt like you were on a set for the movie Reds. And immediately, people were all over you as far as you were sort of treated like a walking wallet if you were from the West. Yeah, I mean, from the cab driver to everyone trying to figure out how to get money out of your pocket. And then when you check into the hotel, your passports were taken down to the police station, and you didn't get them back for like 2 or 3 days. So you couldn't leave the country if you wanted to. And I was surprised that for a city that was supposed to be, as Rick said, the Paris of the East, it was, in fact, it was so depressing. I could handle it, but my husband couldn't. But I mean, the sense of 1984 and passing really what you call soulless people was, I mean, I'm not normally, but I mean, it was really what communism did to people as far as literally draining the life out of people. I've never seen such empty, vacant people. And you saw a lot of women on the street holding up needlework and anything, trying to peddle stuff to get Western money that they could hopefully send to relatives. And it was just really sad. And then I had like I said, as soon as we got our passports back, my husband's like, we're going back to Vienna. And I said, well, so we did. But then I had the privilege of my daughter in 1992, a little Czech girl came over to St. Augustine to go to school with him. And I don't know, it turned out I got to meet her uncle, who was only one in the family that could speak English. But again, they were, even though it had newly been freed, the family was out of the country because of the father was in some business dealings. They were basically exporting Czech antiques into the West as this kind of first form of capitalism. But one of the members of the group was a communist. And so the family was still under observation. And so he got his wife and 2 children out of the country for a while, and they didn't even know, even an uncle said they do not know why they're out of the country. So it was very, but we got to be best friends. And in 1995, they invited us over to visit Prague. And this would be in the early beginning days of Prague really becoming westernized. And as Rick pointed out, Prague is now on everyone's top visit list. And the reason is because it was never bombed in World War II. So all the buildings that were there when Mozart walked the streets are still there, and it's absolutely beautiful. But the main thing is that in 1995, the experience of knowing what breathing freedom feels like was the absolute, which we as Americans take for granted. The joy on the streets and the number of artists and musicians and people who had gone underground who were now out was absolutely exhilarating when you saw what a people felt like after they had been under the shackles of communism. And then I went back 2 years ago, and the change was phenomenal because now it's just a big Western city. It's not as expensive as Paris, but it's getting there. So I sort of got to see it in all 3 stages. But so anyway, yeah. And then I've also went to Prague and to Budapest that same trip. And Budapest is a great place to go now because it's still relatively inexpensive, and yet a lot of everything's been restored. And to see Budapest now, I was sorry my husband wasn't still alive to see it, because compared to where it was like in 1989. Give you an example, we were on the train. I had to be sure that I hid my Time magazine I had picked up in Vienna, because you couldn't take any Western news. And the train stopped as in the middle of the track. The police came on, and some poor schlub was pulled off the train, his suitcase still left overhead, and you just out the window, you saw them being drug across the tracks, and you just wonder what he did and wonder where he's going. So,
yeah.
Wow. And it's like they say, the young people today and have no idea of what life was like unless you talk to some of the older parents. But the House of Terror is definitely creepy, and and very strong. And the other interesting thing is on that statue park, it's a lot of tongue in cheek. It's very far out of town. They don't, you have to take a subway and then several buses to get to it. It's out in the middle of a field. The only way in is through the left door. There's a brick wall at the end symbolizing that communism is nothing but a dead end. The enter through the left, and it's a brick wall at the end. And the grass is left unmowed. It's like, we're saving them, but we are not honoring them in any way. So,
yeah, that's very interesting. I did find that statue park interesting.
They keep it, but it's not something that's a place of honor at all. And the other interesting thing, and I highly recommend that, they had a display that was sort of set up like a gulag, but they had all the films the training films for the secret police that even the projectionist was not allowed to see, but you could watch them, of how they trained the secret police to spy on their neighbors and how they basically bribed people into spying on their neighbors by basically having some, traffic ticket over their head that was going to send them to jail if they didn't spy on their neighbor. And it's like we in the West have no idea what living under a state system like that is. And
well, thanks for sharing that, Melinda. The two sides of the experience. Nancy, did you have something you wanted to share about that? Oh, you had your hand up by accident, maybe. You're muted.
No, I've been to a lot of those countries, but I don't have any of these good stories. You know, it was all post, freedom things. But Budapest, that's sort of like a rundown Paris. I was there in 2010, and it is really interesting. And it was in Prague, I believe, or maybe it was Budapest, that the one waitress, said that the people there were very sullen, that I find them sullen. And it's like, no, that's okay. It's fine with me, but yeah, everything I went to Poland and in Russia, they still keep your passport. You have to register where you stay in the city. You have to take it to some sort of office when you go there. But like in the other towns, I don't know. But yeah, there's a lot of that. Mm-hmm.
That could be a little unnerving.
It is. The having your passport out of your hand is little like, what do they want with that for?
That's right.
This happens. Yeah.
I when they were showing Dresden, I picked up this term that Rick Steves translated. I heard it from some of my German friends, Ahnungslosen, and maybe Jutta can tell me if I've gotten that quite right. It's the people who don't know how life goes. That's how they described the folks that lived in Dresden, because there was no TV reception there, and perhaps also maybe no radio reception. So they really had no clue what life was like in the West. So they called it the people who didn't know how life is. Laura.
I also had an opportunity to travel in Budapest and Prague and Warsaw, and some of the other Eastern Bloc countries. And Budapest was probably about 10 years ago. And I remember one of our guides complaining because she said that the older people were used to living under communism, where they had their houses and apartments. Living quarters were paid for by the government. And so she said they never knew how to take care of their own things. And so she said, now it's all been turned over, and they now are responsible for the real estate. They actually can own real estate. She said, like myself, she said, I'm young and I know the building needs repairing, but nobody wants to do it because they think the government should take care of them. So there's that aspect of communism. And Prague, I always loved Prague, was fabulous. Probably 15 years ago was my first visit. And I told my husband, anytime we go to Europe, we got to go to Prague for a few days. But you're right, the change, and it's a beautiful city. And Warsaw was there too, the year before the Iron Curtain fell, and then the year after. So that was interesting, and made several trips thereafter through the years. But the thing that struck me was that the state building, or the government buildings put up by the communists, were obvious because the old buildings were more ornate and gorgeous architecture and concrete work. But every time we'd go by, the driver would say, "That's from the communists." In a couple of years, we're tearing that down. We couldn't wait to tear it down. I don't know whether they ever did, but I said, no, just put some stuff on the outside and fancy it up, but don't tear it down because you paid for it. But the other thing is, when I look around at the quote unquote new contemporary architecture, my husband and I go by and say, "You'd think we were in Russia." It looks like that's concrete. We've got some houses. They're just concrete with black windows in them. So what goes around, I guess, comes around.
Yeah, thanks for sharing about that, Laura. I'm just noticing that Susan Brandon has put, I'm assuming that's the name of a book by Joni Ut in there, post-war. Yes. I also wanted to mention, and I think last time I might have brought this up, we did this. I have 3 German films I can recommend about about living in communist East Germany. One is The Lives of Others. Another one is called Barbara, which is about a woman who's a doctor. And the third one is kind of I don't know, you call it dramedy, it's either called Goodbye Lenin or Farewell Lenin. It's about a son whose mother she collapses and goes into a coma right at the time that the wall falls in East Berlin, and she wakes up, and now suddenly the country's been reunited, and her son, for her health, is told by the doctor he needs to make sure that she thinks nothing has changed. And so it's a great film. It's quite humorous. And I'll put the names of those in the notes coming to you, as well as the names of some of the classes coming up next week in travel, so you all can come to those.
Russ, another one you might want to add to that is a Czech one. I think it's called Kolya, and it's about a Czech man that worked for was part of the symphony, and his grandson, and it works right on into that 1989, the revolution there in the square. It's how it ends. But that's a very charming story because it gets down to sort of a grandfather-grandson thing, but then it's also got the background. So
yeah, well, great.
The Lives of Others is excellent.
Yeah, The Lives of Others is very good. Well, anyone else have a comment or question? If you can find that film in the next 1 or 2 minutes, Melinda, put that in the chat. We'll have a record of that. I'll make sure that gets out in the notes. I know I'm sending you to scramble.
I was really impressed in seeing Dresden, how it's come back, because I remember, reading all the history, that there was nothing left when the Allies got done with it. It was the one place they decided they were going to make a statement, and they really did. They just leveled the city. So that's pretty impressive the way they brought it back.
Yes, and I don't want to argue with Rick Steves, but his estimate of 25,000 people dying is probably a fourth of what they actually estimate died, because Dresden was full of refugees at the time, not just people that lived there. It was a rail center, and so there estimates that over 100,000 people died in Dresden. Of course, there's a famous novel written about it by Kurt Vonnegut, Slaughterhouse-Five, who was an American soldier in captivity, imprisoned in a prison camp in Dresden, and survived the firebombing of Dresden, and then spent about 25 years almost trying to figure out how to write about it before he did. So,
does anyone know about the politics of bombing Dresden?
Laura,
that's all well planned out. They don't just one day wake up and say, "Hey, you know what we should be doing?"
Right.
Wasn't Dresden a center for munitions? It was.
I don't know.
I think a big munitions factory was there, and it was towards the end of the
it was war. Also a rail center, and part of it is that they were trying to bomb all the rail centers at the end. But I won't go into it any farther than that, because I don't want to get into some misinformation. It might be a little bit beyond the day's topic anyway, but it is important. And I have a good friend, Eckhart Müller, who's grew up in Dresden. He was actually one of those students who was in Leipzig at the protests, the candlelight protests before the wall came down. And actually, he came to the West the second day after the wall came down in November of 1989. Now he lives in West Germany, but I got to know him when he was in America for about a decade. Well, you've been a great group. I really appreciate everyone being here today. And we have lots of new travel classes next week. I'll make sure I put Monday evening's class in. Speaking of communism, we're going to be seeing Frank and Joanne's trip to Kohler's trip to Cuba. And they were there. Actually, they were among the fortunate people who got to travel before the pandemic. I think it was in the November of 2019. Actually, October 2019 was the last time I got on an airplane myself. And they had a great experience, and they'll be sharing with us that next week. Got lots of guests coming up in May to share with us about a whole bunch of things. I won't list them all right now, but I'll be mentioning them next week in classes, including we have a guest coming from Untours to explain to us how Untours works. And we have Marjorie Turner-Holman, who will talk to us about short walks for people that have mobility issues. She has a mobility issue herself. She was paralyzed on one side and can't walk more than 2 miles, but she's written several books about all the trails and hikes she does in Western Massachusetts now that she's regained the ability to do some walking. So she'll be very interesting. She'll be with us May 11th. Laura, did you have one more thing?
Is 2 miles a short walk now?
Well, it just depends on how long you think a normal
2
walk
blocks is a short walk.
Is that 2 blocks? Okay.
I don't know. If you go to Europe, it's not unusual to put 10 to 12 miles a day in. So,
well, we have a saying in our family. I walked the Camino de Santiago 500 miles in 2018. And sometimes somebody will say they'll want to pick me up and give me a ride, a quarter of a mile. I'll say, it's okay. I walked 500 miles. I think I can walk down to the end of the street. So I'm going to say so long. Let's see. Yes. Thank you, Brandon. It's very helpful. He put a whole bunch of upcoming classes in the chat. And if you want to save these, by the way, you go to your chat bubble and you click on where it says file and you can save it. But if you don't have that bubble, there should be 3 dots and it can say save the chat, and you'll save it there. I'll also put those classes and the notes.
I'm sorry, can you repeat that? Go to the dots.
Yes, if you open your chat in the bottom right hand, now I'm looking on a laptop, so I'm not positive it looks the same way on a mobile device. There's a little square in the bottom right with 3 dots on it. If you click on that, click on where it says save chat, and it'll give you options. You can save just save the chat right there. If you click on save chat, and it'll save it, and it'll you'll find it when the class is over.
And where will it save it?
You will find it probably will pop up on your desktop.
Okay.
That's what mine always does. Otherwise, it will save in a text edit. If you have a text editor of some kind on your I have a Mac, so there's a text editor app on it.
Thank you.
You're welcome. I'll make sure those notes, however, get in the notes coming out to you. Everybody, good to see you. Have a great weekend. Hope to see you next Monday.
Thank you very much. Everybody have a wonderful weekend.
You too.
You.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.